3 trillion Korean won, roughly $2.2 billion. That's the amount one man moved in a single night across dozens of shell accounts. While Israeli airstrikes knocked out Tehran's communications, that money was supposed to fund missile deals between North Korea and Iran. Instead, this former ruling party vice chairman redirected it and walked out of the shadows of one of history's most secretive sanctions, evasion networks, forever. Subscribe to understand the reality behind the world's most isolated economy. It was June 2025. The Israeli strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities had just shaken the Middle East to its core, and in the chaos that followed, a man made a decision that had been 38 years in the making. He was one of North Korea's most trusted officials, the ruling party's vice chairman, handpicked by Kim Jong-il himself and kept close by Kim Jong-un. He had spent nearly 4 decades walking a single path. No detours, no doubts. At least that's what everyone believed. Then, in a single night in Tehran, he vanished. And he took 3 trillion Korean won with him. What drove a man like that? Someone guards around the clock couldn't keep from sleeping. To throw it all away? And why did he go to the Americans first? Not South Korea. For the first time, I'm bringing you his story. My South Korean name, I can't share it. Even now, armed guards rotate in shifts outside my home, 24 hours a day. The South Korean government assigned them. At first, that felt strange. But now, if I don't hear those footsteps, I can't sleep. That's how clearly I understand somewhere out there, someone still wants me dead. I joined the party at 18. 38 years, one direction. I earned Kim Jong-il's trust early on, and when Kim Jong-un took over, I stayed at the center head of the United Front Department. People around me said I was unshakable. I believed that myself once. Then came June 2025, and I walked away from all of it overnight. That night in Tehran closed my eyes, and it plays back like a film reel right in front of me. The Israeli jets had just struck Iran's nuclear sites. The city was in chaos. I sat alone in my office, staring at a laptop screen. I had first set foot in Tehran in the spring of 2025. The morning I left Pyongyang, my wife set the table without a word. My son sat down quietly and ate. Our whole family moved through that breakfast in silence. Just spoons against bowls. No words were needed. My wife knew. My son knew. The road to Tehran wasn't a simple assignment. We had already quietly stepped inside the plan. We said everything we needed to say through our eyes. Through the silence over that table, the seeds of that plan had been planted long before Tehran. December 2013, I was in Pyongyang the day Jang Song-taek was arrested. You may have seen the footage. Dragged from a meeting hall, executed within days. But what you saw on a screen and what I witnessed, standing a few feet away, those are two entirely different experiences. Jang Song-taek was my superior. He was the one who helped me find my footing in the United Front Department and earn Kim Jong-il's confidence. I walked the path he pointed to. I believed what he said was right. He was called the second most powerful man in North Korea. Over 30 years at the heart of the system, and he was gone overnight. They pinned all kinds of charges on him, but I knew the truth. It wasn't about guilt. He had been around too long. He knew too much. He had grown too large. That was his crime. That was the day I first understood in this system. The longer your loyalty, the more you know, the more dangerous you become. So where did that leave me? A man who had run the United Front Department since Kim Jong-il's era. A man who had worked closely alongside Jang Song-taek. A man who had seen too deep into the machinery of the regime. My neck could be on the line at any moment. From that day on, I kept my face still, attended meetings, filed reports, recited loyalty oaths. But inside, very quietly, I started looking for a way out. No rushing. The opportunity had to come to me. All I could do was be ready when it did. Years passed. Then, in 2025, the order came Tehran. My official title was Vice Chairman of the Korean Workers' Party. Before the Tehran posting, I had served as Director of the United Front Department, a position I'd held since the Kim Jong-il era. The fact that someone like me was sent personally tells you everything about how critical this mission was. My cover title said, Director of the Pyongyang Trading Corporation, Tehran Branch. The real job was something else entirely. North Korea was supplying Iran with missile-related technology. In return, Iran was supplying oil. My job was to manage the entire flow of money, keeping it invisible, keeping it untouchable by international sanctions. Both countries are under U.S. sanctions. Official wire transfers? Impossible. Direct dollar exchanges? Out of the question. That's where someone like me came in. Dozens of shell companies. Money split and routed through multiple countries. Funds pooled in places no one could trace. Money laundering in plain terms, I was the expert. The first 2 or 3 years, I worked like a machine. Numbers, transfers, reports. Orders came from Pyongyang, I executed them. I had one eye on the exit the whole time, but I didn't rush. The opening had to come from the other side. Then 2017 arrived. The transaction volume surged. The scale of missile-related payments and oil deals grew sharply. The numbers in my ledgers multiplied. And something strange happened. My predecessor was suddenly recalled to Pyongyang. No warning. His name was Choi Dong-hyuk, 10 years older than me, a veteran of more than a decade in this work. The day he left, he pulled me aside and dropped his voice low. "Comrade Park, the ledger is just a ledger. Don't look behind the numbers." 3 months later, word filtered back Choi Dong-hyuk had been sent to a political prison camp. Nearly 30 years of loyalty. Gone just like that. The same playbook as Jang Sung-taek. That night, I looked behind the numbers. I traced the shell accounts, one by one until they all converged at a single point. Bureau 39, Kim Jong-un's private treasury. While North Korean citizens shivered and starved, everyone from missile sales, every drop of oil revenue, all of it flowed upward. Every last cent. I closed the file, stared out the window for a long time. A few stars were visible in the Tehran sky. The opportunity I had been waiting for was sitting right there. It was the fall of 2024 when the cable arrived from Pyongyang. An ordinary Tuesday morning. I was at my desk going through ledgers. Tehran's morning air was crisp. People outside were heading to work. Nothing unusual. The message was short. Comrade Vice Chairman Park is to return to Pyongyang this month for a final accounting report. 2 lines. Stamped by the organization and guidance department. I read it twice. Set it down slowly. Final accounting report. It sounds reasonable, but I'd been in this world for over 30 years. How many men recalled under that exact phrase ever came back? I knew the number. Choi Dong-hyuk had received a similar cable. He flew to Pyongyang. He never returned to Tehran. Jang Sung-taek had meetings scheduled the morning they took him. In this system, a recall order means one of 2 things: a promotion or the end. For someone who had been around as long as I had, who knew as much as I knew, there was no need to think about which one this was. That afternoon, I locked my office door and, for the first time, laid the plan out in concrete terms. Everything I had sketched in my mind, I began translating into real steps. When? Which route? Who to contact first? South Korea's National Intelligence Service was never in the picture. You might wonder why same people, same language, a country that takes in defectors. But think about what I was carrying. The original contracts for North Korea's missile technology transfers to Iran, the complete list of money laundering accounts, covering a decade of transactions, the full trail of every payment that had moved between the 2 countries. This wasn't ordinary defector intelligence. This was the beating heart of a nuclear proliferation network. The United States had been hunting for decades. If I walked into Seoul first, I knew exactly what would happen. North Korean agents operate in Seoul. No one knows how deep their reach goes inside the NIS. The moment I chose South Korea, that information could reach Kim Jong-un before I ever set foot on a plane. And then my family in Pyongyang and I would both disappear. It had to be the Americans. More specifically, the Trump administration. Iran's nuclear program isn't just a diplomatic issue for Washington. After taking office, President Trump had made it his top priority. The North Korea-Iran documents I was holding were exactly the leverage the U.S. needed to pressure Tehran. I had what they wanted most. At any negotiating table, the side with the stronger hand sets the terms. That's true in Pyongyang. In Tehran. In Washington. It doesn't change. I began carefully mapping how to approach the U.S. Embassy without moving a single visible step. Going directly to the door was not an option. North Korean state security agents were in the same building as me. Every move I made was logged. If I walked to a cafe, if I took a stroll, if I spoke with someone, I was always being watched. So I used a go-between, a Korean-Chinese broker who had worked business deals in Iran for nearly 20 years. We didn't exchange names. That was the nature of the relationship. Through him, I let things filter out, just outlines, just fragments. The original missile technology transfer contracts between North Korea and Iran, a decade's worth of money laundering, accounts. The names of North Korean engineers deployed to Iranian nuclear facilities. Everything the U.S. had spent decades chasing, but never pinned down. All of it was in my hands. Washington moved faster than I expected. And then came the night of the strikes. June 22nd, 2025. Around 7 p.m., air raid sirens started going off across Tehran. Word spread in minutes. Israeli aircraft had launched toward Iran's nuclear sites. At first, I thought it was a rumor. That kind of talk circulated constantly in the Middle East. But this time was different. The news anchor's face had gone rigid. Iranian state broadcasting cut out mid-sentence. The building manager ran through the hallways, shouting for everyone to get to the basement. I didn't go down. The state security agents had scrambled outside or down to the shelter. The Iranian counterparts were gone. For the first time since I'd arrived in Tehran, the watching eyes had disappeared. I had been waiting for exactly this. For years, I had tracked Iran's air defense network. A significant portion of the funds I managed were tied directly to maintaining those systems. I knew better than anyone what North Korea's missile technology was being used for, and I knew when that air defense network cracked, Iran's communications would crack with it. Israel had found the crack and driven straight through. I opened my laptop. The few seconds it took the screen to load felt like an hour. Outside, something that sounded like a distant explosion. The office windows trembled slightly. I kept my hands moving. On the screen, the transfer list I had spent months preparing. $3 trillion won the combined missile payments and oil payments. North Korea owed Iran sitting in a queue, waiting to land in the Iranian designated accounts. By every plan I had ever filed, that money was supposed to cross that night. Transfer complete. Mission closed. Then I fly back to Pyongyang. Instead, I changed the destination. The Iranian account numbers came out. In went the routing codes for dozens of paper companies' accounts. I had spent months building across Europe, Southeast Asia, the Middle East. Concentrating funds in one place gets you caught. It had to be scattered, shredded into pieces. 500,000, 1 million, $2 million. Numbers streaked across the screen. The moment I pressed the first transfer button, I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life. My fingertips were cold. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. And yet my mind was perfectly clear. Fear, when it crosses a certain line, doesn't paralyze you, it crystallizes you. Like the eye of a storm. Transfer complete. Transfer complete. Transfer complete. Confirmation messages cascaded down the screen. I held my breath and watched. If Iran's systems flagged an anomaly, an alarm would trigger. If the line to Pyongyang was still live, a call would come. 2 minutes passed. Silence. Israel's strikes had severed a significant portion of Iran's communications. My calculation had been right. Pyongyang and Tehran at that exact moment couldn't see each other clearly. I kept going. It took over an hour. Outside, explosions came and went. City lights cut out across entire districts, then flickered back. In that shifting dark and light, I never left my chair. 3 trillion won, broken into dozens of fragments scattered across the world. When the last transfer completed, the clock read 11 p.m. I closed the laptop. For the first time, I let myself sink back into my chair. Looked up at the ceiling. The fluorescent light was white and cold. 38 years. Over. Now the only thing left was getting out alive. I pulled the backup phone from my pocket. One I'd never used for anything official. Dialed. 2 rings. Someone answered. Silence on both ends. The first to speak is the weaker party. That's true at every table, Pyongyang, Tehran, anywhere. 38 years had taught me that. 4 seconds of silence. Then the other side spoke first. English. Low and calm. We've been waiting. I gave the code number. I had prepared a sequence that confirmed my identity. Then I added 1 sentence, a compressed summary of exactly what I was holding. A pause on the other end. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Location to follow by text. The call was under 30 seconds. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. Outside, Tehran was still unsettled from the strikes. Sirens drifted in from somewhere distant. A helicopter passed overhead. Inside the room, quiet. The next morning's address came by text. A small hotel on the northern edge of the city. I left for work as if nothing had changed. A state security agent may have been trailing me. I switched directions 3 times. Changed taxis twice. Cut through a market alley, passed through a crowded underpass. No one was following. The strikes had thrown the whole city into disarray. State security wasn't immune to that chaos. 3rd floor, last room. I knocked 3 times. 2 men opened the door, one white, mid-50s, one of Korean descent. Both in suits. No business cards. On the table, 2 laptops, a recorder. Curtains drawn. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound. I sat down. Did you bring it? Instead of answering, I reached into my bag and set a sealed envelope on the table. The white man opened it. Inside a USB drive and several printed documents. He inserted the drive. As he studied the screen, something subtle shifted in his expression. The Korean-descended man leaned forward. That was enough. I had my answer. The Americans wanted 3 things: the original missile technology transfer contracts between North Korea and Iran, a complete decade's worth of money laundering, account records and the names of North Korean engineers deployed to Iranian nuclear facilities. I had brought all 3. From the day I first stepped foot in Tehran, just in case I had been collecting. Not a single day after Jang Song-thaek disappeared had I let my guard down. My conditions were also 3. First, guaranteed asylum and lifetime protection for me, my wife, and my son. Second, diplomatic measures to shield the family members left behind in Pyongyang from retaliation as much as possible. Third, of the funds I had diverted, 1 trillion won to the U.S., 1 trillion won to South Korea, and in exchange, full legal immunity for the remainder. The white man looked up from the screen, met my eyes directly. The third condition, what do you plan to do with the rest? I gave the answer I had prepared. That's my business. He held my gaze for a moment, then gave a single nod. President Trump is handling this personally. We'll have an answer within 72 hours. The meeting ran over 2 hours. Documents reviewed. Account numbers verified one by one. Transaction dates and amounts cross-checked. Questions came. I answered everything I knew, exactly as I knew it. Concealment kills your value. At that table, my worth depended entirely on how accurate and complete my information was. Walking out of the hotel, I looked up at the sky for a moment. The Tehran morning sun was sharp. I flagged a taxi, went back to the office, sat at my desk, opened the ledger. At the end of the corridor, a state security agent stood at his post. I glanced his way and gave a small nod. He nodded back. An ordinary afternoon. Nothing had changed. The 72 hours had begun. Those 3 days were the longest of my life. Daytime I played the part, reviewed ledgers, met with the Iranian counterparts, had lunch at the usual restaurant. I tried to walk a little slower than usual, smile a little more casually. Someone running can't afford to look like they're running. That's the first law of this world. But the first afternoon brought something I hadn't planned for. One of the state security agents, a man named Kang Cheol-soo, early 30s, sharp eyes, almost never spoke, walked into my office without knocking, sat down across from me. Comrade Vice Chairman, Pyongyang has been in touch. They're asking us to finalize your return schedule. I looked at him evenly. Didn't change my expression. There's still a financial closing to complete this week. I can't move until that's done. Report that upward. Kang held my gaze for a long moment. Something behind his eyes was calculating. Young but not ordinary. Still all he could do was report. I knew that. After he left, I sat without moving for 5 minutes. Time was running out. Pyongyang asking to finalize the return schedule meant the recall window was closing fast. The Americans had said 72 hours, but the clock in Pyongyang wasn't waiting for them. That night I barely slept, stared out the window at Tehran's lights, thought about home. What was my wife doing? Where was my son? Were they following the plan? I couldn't call. Reaching out to my wife at that moment would hand state security a signal. I had no choice but to trust. Trust her. Trust my son. Trust the plan we had built together. The second morning, Kang Cheol-soo again. Pyongyang has followed up. Complete return preparations by end of this week. This time the tone was different. Not a request. A directive. I answered without looking up from the papers. Understood. I'll prepare. After he left, I counted silently. 48 hours of the 72 had passed. 24 remained. That afternoon, I had a final meeting with the Iranian counterpart. They were frustrated about the delays since the strikes. I managed the conversation, kept things smooth, wrapped it up. He didn't know it was the last time we'd meet. Just past midnight on the second night, the backup phone buzzed. One text. All conditions accepted. Vehicle arrives at 2 a.m. tomorrow. Minimal luggage. I read it 3 times, deleted it, dropped the phone in the toilet and flushed. No traces. That's the baseline. I packed, or rather, I didn't pack. Passport, document file, a small amount of cash. That was everything. I didn't touch a single piece of clothing. Didn't move a personal item. Picking up a bag draws eyes. Everything in that room had to stay exactly as it was. 38 years of a life. That was enough to carry it. 1 a.m. I stepped out of the lodging. I moved slowly like someone taking a late-night walk. Checked behind me twice going around corners. No sign of Kang Chae-ol-soo. No other agents visible. 1 to 30 a.m. is a calculated window. State security agents rarely hold position outside overnight. I had built that into the plan. The rendezvous point was a small gas station on the northern edge of Tehran. 20 minutes on foot. Walking that stretch, I felt something unexpected calm. Not fear. Not excitement. Just walking. The sense that a very long road was finally nearing its end. A black sedan sat in front of the station. Headlights blinked twice the signal I had been given. I got in. The 2 men in front never spoke a word the entire way. I didn't ask anything. The car moved northwest, away from the city. The pre-dawn roads were empty. The Iranian countryside slid past in the dark. Distant lights appeared and disappeared. For the first time, I closed my eyes. Around 4 a.m., the car stopped at a small airfield. One propeller aircraft sat on the runway, engine already running. Climbing the boarding steps, I turned and looked back once. Tehran's early sky was still dark. Somewhere on the horizon, smoke or haze or both rising faintly, where the strikes had hit. I looked at it for a moment. That was my last image of Tehran. The plane lifted off. I didn't know where we were headed. I didn't need to. 2 layovers. 2 days of flying. Somewhere in between, a brief message came through. My wife and son had gotten out safely through a separate route. The Americans had kept their word on the family extraction. That was the moment I finally closed my eyes, really closed them. Something hot rose from behind my eyes. I pressed it back down. It wasn't over yet. Washington was waiting. I arrived in Washington at the end of June 2025. From the airport, everything moved differently. No standard immigration line. A separate corridor. Document verification in under 3 minutes. 2 black vehicles took me directly to a facility outside the city. No name on the building. Gray exterior walls. Reinforced windows. Armed guards at the entrance. I was assigned a room. Clean, quiet. A bed, a desk, 1 window. Through the glass trees. I stared at those trees for a long time. That night I saw my wife and son for the first time. They were brought from another room. When they walked in, I couldn't speak for a moment. My wife had lost weight. My son had grown a beard. The 3 of us stood and looked at each other without saying a word. She turned away first. Her eyes were red. I couldn't speak either. I took her hand. Held it for maybe 30 seconds. Then a handler came in to brief us on the next day's schedule. We returned to our separate rooms. For that moment, it was enough. It had to be enough. Formal debriefing started the next morning. Several hours a day for 4 days. Different faces each session, military uniforms, suit-wearing analysts. A Korean interpreter stayed in the room. They asked the same things in different ways, over and over. The details of the North Korea-Iran transactions, the money trail, the level of technology transferred, the identities of North Korean engineers deployed to Iranian nuclear sites. I answered the same way each time. Once I say something, I say it exactly the same way the second time. The third time, a lie always breaks somewhere. 38 years taught me that too. On the morning of the 4th day, the debriefer walked in and said it simply. "The president will meet with you this afternoon. Be ready." I didn't respond right away. Trump was handling this personally. I had heard that in Tehran. But I half doubted it would actually happen. A sitting U.S. president meeting directly with a North Korean defector. There was no precedent. That fact alone told me everything about how seriously Washington was taking this. In the car on the way to the meeting room, I thought about Jang Song-taek. If he had lived, what would he make of this moment? The day they dragged him from that hall, something locked into place inside me. And 12 years later, I was sitting at the end of that decision. The meeting room was smaller than I expected. 1 conference table, a few chairs, no American flags, no decorations. President Trump was already seated. 2 aides, an interpreter. I sat across from him. He was more direct than I had anticipated. The diplomatic pleasantries ended and he went straight to it. How far has the technology North Korea is providing to Iran actually advanced? I answered as I had prepared. North Korea was supplying guidance system components that Iran couldn't manufacture independently. Without that technology, Iran's precision strike capability would drop sharply. The fact that Iran's air defenses were penetrated during the recent strikes was not unrelated to delays in North Korea's technical support. Trump nodded. "Will the transfers continue even with you gone?" "They won't stop because I left. A replacement has almost certainly already been deployed." He studied me for a moment. "What's the mood inside Pyongyang right now?" How do you think Kim Jong-un is reading this situation? I answered plainly. Kim Jong-un is managing two things simultaneously: the internal damage control from my defection and filling the gap in the Iran arrangement. Neither is easy. The Iranian side is going to push hard over the 3 trillion one that vanished. How that diplomatic friction unfolds, I can't predict. The meeting ran under 30 minutes. As it ended, the president stood and said, "That took courage. America keeps its promises." We shook hands. Short, firm. That handshake was later leaked to the press. I still don't know by which channel. But the timing was almost certainly deliberate. A single photograph, no words, sent a signal to both Pyongyang and Tehran at once. Sometimes a picture delivers a message that no statement can. The day that photo circulated worldwide, I watched the news from inside the facility. My face was blurred. Senior North Korean defector. CIA cooperation. 3 trillion won. The words scrolled across the chyron. An anchor read analysts' assessments with a grave expression. Watching it, I felt strangely detached. That was my story. But it sounded like someone else's. Pyongyang would have erupted. And that's when the thought I couldn't push away came back. The family I left behind. My brother. My cousins. People I ran through the streets with as a child. The moment that news broke, their lives changed. Guilt by association Yunjuaje is as natural as breathing in North Korea. One person's crime pulls 3 generations in. I knew that when I made this choice. I've known it every night since. That weight sits in my chest like a stone. It isn't going anywhere. The financial arrangements were settled as agreed. 1 trillion won to the United States. 1 trillion won to South Korea. In exchange, lifetime protection and asylum for my family. Legal immunity on the remainder. 3 trillion won accounted for. That money was supposed to fund Iran's side of a weapons deal. Supposed to keep North Korea's nuclear and missile programs running. Instead, it went somewhere else. I don't believe that was wrong. I arrived in South Korea in the late fall of 2025. I was the one who requested the transfer from Washington. America is safe, orderly, quiet, but I wanted to speak Korean. I wanted to wake up and hear Korean drifting through an open window. My wife felt the same. So did my son. We are the same people in the end. No matter how long the division, no matter how far apart the years have pushed us, that doesn't go anywhere. The South Korean government provided protection as promised. I can't say where I live. Guards are posted outside at all hours. No one recognizes me. My face and name haven't been made public. Still, the sense that someone is always watching never fully lifts. At first, it brought back Pyongyang, the constant surveillance, the eyes that never blinked. Then one day it hit me, this is different. These aren't eyes that want to harm me. These are eyes keeping me alive. That one difference, I had to live it to understand how much it changes everything. I remember the first time I walked into a convenience store alone in Seoul. Past midnight. Fluorescent lights over rows of shelves stacked floor to ceiling. Snacks, drinks, boxed meals, medicine, umbrellas, charging cables. People walked in, picked things up, paid, and left. Like it was nothing. I stood in front of those shelves for a long time. I didn't buy anything. I just stood there. In Pyongyang, this doesn't exist. No ration card, no social standing check, just money, and you get what you want. That kind of ordinary freedom. I had spent nearly 40 years in a place where it wasn't ordinary at all. Standing under those lights, it landed all at once. Something burned behind my eyes. I grabbed the nearest drink, paid, and walked out. It was sweet. The press conference came 2 months after I arrived in South Korea. Cameras flashed the moment I walked in. I sat down, leaned toward the microphone, and my hands started shaking. They hadn't shaken in that Tehran office while I moved 3 trillion won. They hadn't shaken in the CIA debrief room, not even shaking hands with President Trump. Later, I figured out why. Until that moment, this story was known only to a few intelligence officers and handlers. But the instant I took that microphone, it became the world's story. It would eventually reach the ears of people still living in Pyongyang. That weight traveled through the microphone and into my hands. I began slowly. The missile technology transfers between North Korea and Iran are continuing. At this very moment, my departure didn't stop them. A replacement has already been sent. Iran needs North Korea's missile technology. North Korea needs Iran's oil and funding, no matter how tight. International sanctions get those transfers flow underground. You can redirect a river, but you can't stop water from moving. The world needs to know what's really happening. That is why I am sitting here. Hands went up across the room. A reporter asked, Do you regret taking the 3 trillion won? I paused. I'll be honest about regret. Whether what I did was right, I'm still not entirely certain. But I know one thing. If that money had gone where it was supposed to go, it would have become nuclear weapons, missiles. Someday those might have detonated over someone's country. If my actions played any small part in preventing that, then what I feel is something larger than regret. Another hand went up. Aren't you worried about the family you left behind in Pyongyang? I stopped. Not a brief pause. A long one. The room went quiet. I sat at that microphone and just held still for a moment. I'll be honest. That is what I think about every night before I fall asleep. My brother is in Pyongyang. My cousins. People I played with in the streets as a child. What they have gone through since I did this, I don't know. There is no way to know. Something bad almost certainly happened. In this system, guilt by association is as inevitable as the air. That is why this decision took longer and cut deeper than anything else I've ever faced. I couldn't say I had no regrets. Not for that part. The press conference ended. I stepped outside. Fall sunlight poured down. Before getting in the car, I stopped and looked up. Seoul's sky was high and clear. Not a single cloud. A sky that deep blue. That same sky, if you follow it north, becomes Pyongyang's sky. The same sky. The same language. The same food. The same songs. The same people living underneath it. Some of you watching may remember. The war that ended. The country that split in two. Families separated, some to the south, some to the north, in a moment that still hasn't healed. Decades later, and the longing doesn't fade. I know that now. My own body knows it. When will the day come when we can move freely under that same sky? I want to see it. I want to be alive when it happens. The day the system I betrayed is gone. The day the people on that land can walk into a convenience store, not buy a single thing and just feel the warmth of it for no reason, freely, if I live to see that day. The sound of those guards outside my door and the weight pressing on my chest every night, maybe it gets a little lighter. The guard opened the car door. I got in. Seoul streets moved past the window. I am alive.